All right, and welcome to another edition of the ArenaCraftPodcast, a show focused exclusively to Magic the Gathering Arena. We don't even consider talking about anything that doesn't happen exactly exclusively within the Magic Arena client. My name is Arjuna. I'm one of your hosts today. And today, co-host Covertgoblue is a very monumental, momentous occasion for a number of reasons. The first of which is, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can finally see us talking. Covertgoblue, we are live on video. How are you doing?
I've never been live on video on YouTube before. This is very mind-blowing experience. Yes.
I see you're taking to it quite naturally.
Well, when you look this good, it's not hard.
I couldn't agree more. You got me going. So for those of you listening via audio who can't see this happening right now, what are you doing? Head over to YouTube and go ahead and look on Covertgoblue's channel. We haven't figured out all of the details, so for now, go to Covertgoblue's channel, and we're going to be posting these podcasts there, and you can see us chatting. You will also be able to see the spoilers, which is what we're going to spend the vast majority of today talking about. Strixhaven, we just got a big dump of spoilers, and so we can finally kick off the madness, which is ArenaCraft set review spoiler season.
Indeed. Strixhaven is coming, baby, and the cards are flying. They're just flying at us, just being hurled at us this week.
Dude, if you see me during this video kind of leaning into my monitor and squinting, it's because there's so much text on these cards, they literally bumped it down like 2 font sizes.
That is completely accurate. I'm gonna go ahead and use the control scroll wheel option right now and make these bigger.
I know, dude. This might we were talking about how Kaldheim has a lot of text. Has this set actually topped it so far in terms of text on cards?
The only way to find out is to read every single line of text on these cards and see if our voices come out in worse shape than they did after the Kaldheim spoilers. That's the only scientific method we can use.
So, quick overview of how the show's going to go. We are going to start with the Strixhaven spoilers that were revealed for the main set, which is going into standard. We are then also going to talk about the Mystical Archive. If you're not sure what this is, don't worry about it. We're going to describe it more in detail when we get to it. But the short version is that it's like this extra set of special cards, which are also going to come in boosters, both in real life and on Arena. And it's a supplemental set, most of which is going into Historic. So that's the TLDR. We'll cover that more. We're going to skip the normal stuff today, such as the question of the week and that kind of thing. It's already going to be a huge show.
Mm-hmm.
But CGB, I did just quickly want to ask you, because we've both been playing it all week, how did you enjoy the early access event and then the follow-up just playing Magic Legends?
I love Magic Legends, and I think in a unique way where I'm only really getting into the game got me in by being a Magic product. It is in the Magic universe. These are characters I've played in card game form or known about for a long time. So when I play them in a more just dynamic universe, like a 3D universe where you get to run around and summon angels and cast blue spells like control magic and summon water elementals. For me, that's really, really cool. And I got to play it with some pretty sweet dudes, Danny T and Crokies. Crokies invited me to the squad. I was like, that's pretty epic. So part of it's who I'm playing with. We haven't really had a way to game together before. People who just play Magic like us, the only way to play Magic on Arena is to battle each other. It's the only option. And when you're a content creator, people don't understand how much baggage that comes with. When,
Mm.
like, if you guys just get together to battle, fans want to make a big deal of it, and fans want stakes, and fans want to be excited, and fans want to talk trash about who's better. And all of that actually comes with a lot of baggage where it doesn't feel like you can just get together and play some fun, friendly games. But a cooperative like
Yeah, right.
Legends,
You're not just like chilling with your mates, drinking a beer and playing some games, right? Like that's
yep,
not really the vibe that you can cultivate.
that's not how Arena works for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Legends being cooperative and just cruising the countryside with your friends, slaying some monsters, like I'm down for that. I could do that all day. So what did you think of Magic Legends?
Yeah, I also really enjoyed it primarily for the reasons you highlighted. I'm like, this is honestly my first AARPG, which is what it is. I'm still not even really sure like where like an online AARPG differs from an MMO or whatever. So for me, it's kind of like I'm checking both of those boxes. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
ooh, there's another player running in the countryside, and oh, we magically teamed up and defeated this little challenge or whatever. So like I'm just enjoying that. I'm just learning about the genre basically and really getting into it. And then of course it's the Magic property, and I'm a huge fan. And so even though I think, first of all, the game's an open beta, so there's definitely crashes and weirdnesses and various things that aren't balanced and whatever, but it's pretty good. It's pretty playable from the get-go. And the acting's like not that exciting. I don't know. It leaves something to be desired just from an objectively video game standpoint. But that has not stopped me from just having an absolute blast playing it. Like I'm just enjoying casting my spells, building my deck. Like, ooh,
Oh
look,
yeah.
there's a flame tongue Kavu.
People who have played games like it have no lack of complaints about the economy, the gameplay, and a ton of other things. For
Yeah.
me, this reminds me of when you would go to the arcade, meet up with your friends, and play like the Street Fighter or the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle side-scrolling game, where all you do is walk right, and more enemies come at you forever and ever, and you just try to
Yeah.
see how far you can get on like how many quarters you bought, and you bring your friends. The Simpsons arcade game is another example of that side-scrolling style. That's how Legends feels to me. I'm just cruising with my boys at the arcade through the countryside, seeing how many things we can kill in the hour or two that we're given, and for that, I'm having fun.
Dude, it's a lot of fun. Yeah. If you're not like some super elite RPG gamer already, you'll probably just download it, play it, have a lot of fun, have a blast. So yeah, I highly recommend it. It's free. No reason not to try it, really. So I'm not getting paid to say this. I wish I was, but I'm not. I just genuinely enjoyed the game, and I'm glad that you did too, CGB. So you can periodically catch CGB, Danny T Law, and Crokies streaming this on Twitch. I assume that you're gonna keep squatting up and doing that moving forward.
We've done it twice. I've also played with Nerd Girl on Thursday night on Variety Night. I hope we get to play more there. So yeah, I'm hoping to do more Legend streams, but I think we'll squat up and play some.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, so there's that. Try it out. Have fun. All right. Time for us to transition into Strixhaven spoilers. Now, we definitely covered some of this last time we talked about Strixhaven. We kind of started to get into it, but let's just do a little quick review. So we've got 5 colleges, and they are all 2-color pairs. They are enemy colors. And I don't know, let's see. Is there anything else smart for us to say about that before we dive in?
I mean, those are the facts. Those are
Yes.
absolutely the facts. So,
Yes.
nothing like any other IP we've ever seen before.
No.
Right down to the owl set logo.
It's a brilliant idea. It might go viral, CGB.
Yeah.
People
yeah.
might like it.
All right.
So, okay. So, Monday of this week that we're recording, so this will be last week for when you're checking this out, they spoiled 2 mythic planeswalkers for the set. And they like to do this, give us a few planeswalkers to get going on. And these planeswalkers are both pretty interesting. So I'm interested to talk about them. Covertgoblue, do you want to do us the honors and fire off with Kasmina?
Kazmina Enigma Sage is 1 and a green-blue legendary planeswalker with 2 starting loyalty, mythic rare. Has a passive ability, so welcome back passives. Each other planeswalker you control has the loyalty abilities of Kasmina Enigma Sage. First loyalty ability is +2 to scry 1. Second loyalty ability is -X to create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Put X +1/+1 counters on it. And number 3 loyalty ability is -8. Search your library for an instant or sorcery card that shares a color with this planeswalker. Exile that card, then shuffle. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost.
So immediately the vultures started to circle over this card because it reminded us of another famous planeswalker with the same casting cost.
You speak of the Oko.
Indeed. Oko has been banished to Legend from most formats, and this is not immediately looking like a card that's going to get the Oko treatment. However, I do think that this card has more possibility than at least some of what I've been hearing people talk about on Twitter and stuff. A lot of people I've heard are just trashing this card, saying it's not going to be good. I'm not ready to throw in the towel on Kazmina. First of all, I think that passive ability is kind of has quietly a lot of potential. And for standard, I would agree. I'm not like super excited to throw this into a standard deck right off the bat, but I will say for historic, there are some interesting implications with this. First of all, being able to +2 your Narset. I don't know. Is that appealing to you, Covertgoblue?
No, I only want to minus it because I like drawing cards a lot better than scrying 1.
I mean, that's fair. Supposing your Narset's already on 1.
Supposing your Narset's already on 1, you basically dug for 2 cards. Hopefully one of them wasn't Kazmina. You kind of want to find cards that do stuff. I mean, you have a Narset on the board, it minus twice, and the opponent did absolutely nothing about it. Yes, playing Kazmina and plussing it is nice. So my critique of the card is like it's good if you're in a staring match without any counter spells, I guess, because if you're going to play this and then plus it and then play, say, a Teferi or a Narset or have something like that on the board already, and then plus that 2 to scry 1, there's just nothing on the board, right? Like, because if there is, it's just attacking down your planeswalkers and killing them, and you're not really defending them. You're just moving loyalty around. So there are matchups where this is good. There are formats where this is good, but they have to be slow. The board has to basically be non-existent. And I'm really skeptical of cards like that because it doesn't have to be that way. Like decks will rise up and play threats and things that just go over and smash your planeswalker. Questing Beast is still in the format. Like, I can't get too excited about the idea of playing multiple planeswalkers and having time to plus them up, and most of what you gain from that is a scry.
I think that's very fair. And I think it's why Kazmina is not just going to go into every deck. This is definitely not going to be like a Teferi Master of Time, where you're just any deck that plays the colors is going to consider running it. So I totally give you that. But I do think so. Okay. So Kazmina ticks up to 4. And if she doesn't, if she goes unmolested, she is capable of creating up to a 3/3 creature on the following turn.
Yep.
Right. So it's a little bit more interesting. Let's say you play this on turn 4 with a fatal push up, or on turn 5 with some removal up, or maybe on turn 5 with a counterspell backup, right? Now, of course, none of these things are ideal, but a lot of, your 3-mana planeswalkers are always a little bit taxed, right? They're always in this, I mean, apart from Teferi Master of Time, which is just the boss of the universe, which is why he got banned everywhere, basically. But most 3-mana planeswalkers do have this problem. So I don't think that Kazmina is unique in that regard. And I think that it's fairly interesting to be able to give any planeswalker a +2, and also to give any planeswalker an outlet to spend some of its loyalty making a fractal creature. Now, if there are other effects which make fractal creatures better, then this effect could get better, but we haven't really seen that, so we can't speculate on it. I'm curious about, I mean, this -8 is a long way away, right?
Yes, a very, very long way away.
Supposing, I think one of the places that this gets most interesting is with high loyalty planeswalkers, right? Could we imagine playing this and the War of the Spark Kiora planeswalker in the same deck?
You could do it. I'm not.
Okay,
yes, you could try these things, definitely.
Let me float this by you. There was a Jeskai Super Friends deck in Historic that was doing quite well playing Lotus Field.
Mm-hmm.
And Kiara with Lotus Field is gangbusters, right? So, I don't know. That could be a shell. Anyway, I'm not saying Kazmina is just like going to be immediately a headliner, but I think that Kazmina has interesting implications, and I wouldn't write her off just from the get-go.
You're definitely right about that. It's a unique effect, so there might be the perfect setup for it.
Yeah, this is kind of it's a combo card, or like a filling a very unique purpose. Has to go into a planeswalker deck. I don't think you run this in a deck that's not doing some amount of super friending around. And you also, you might want your deck to have at least one heavy hitting instant or sorcery in it, so that -8 actually does something. Cool. All right. So that's Kazmina. Let's move on to Professor Onyx.
It's Professor Onyx. What are you talking about? Strictly Professor Onyx, who is only Professor Onyx and not anybody else.
Had a Freudian slip there, I guess. Sorry. So Professor Onyx, 4 black, is a 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker, Liliana. And someone's undercover on this plane. Liliana also has a passive, which is a new keyword ability, Magecraft. So Magecraft is whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, something happens. I think so far we've seen this ability only on cards that drain. Am I right about that?
We've seen this ability only on cards that drain?
Here's what I'm not sure about. I don't know if Magecraft is whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, blank happens, right?
It is. No, okay. I think that's correct.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be like a drain effect. Yeah, okay. So in this particular case, the Magecraft ability is each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So the +1 ability is you lose 1 life. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. The -3, each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures that player controls. And the -8, each opponent may discard a card. If they don't, they lose 3 life. Repeat this process 6 more times, which, my friends, is a lot of times to repeat that effect.
It's like Torment of Hailfire for 7, but they can't sacrifice permanents. It's Hand or Dome, and those are your only choices. And that's it. My initial impression for this card is actually that it's very powerful and has at least 1 immediate home, but it is a 6-mana planeswalker. It is very, in a lot of ways, a classic planeswalker with a interesting passive ability, so that when you're casting spells around it, you gain that drain effect, which could be huge. If you untap with that drain effect and you cast 2 or 3 spells, and remember, plussing it does in a way draw you cards. It draws you cards with selection. Like that's a big swing. It's going to be hard to beat if you play this and untap with it. And it does come with like probably 6 loyalty to start, or 2 loyalty if you -3 to remove a creature from the opponent's side. So I'm pretty optimistic about it, but the thing that I just know is it already has a home. Sultai Ultimatum. When you play this with Vorinclex off your Ultimatum package and -8, they're probably dead, or they have no hand whatsoever, because you just get to do the -8 ultimate right away.
So let me ask you this. Because that's good. That's quite powerful. Is that better than the existing options?
It can be if there aren't graveyards. Like, have you ever looked at Valky and then looked at their graveyard? It got exiled by, an escape card, and looked at your graveyard and there was maybe only like one card there. I think that happens sometimes.
That's true. I mean, you're talking to the guy who doesn't like to run Vorinclex in his ultimatum decks, so I guess I'm definitely on the skeptic side of the whole notion. But I mean, you're not wrong. It's a very, very powerful combo for sure.
She also sees, like, the historic version plays Dreadhorde General here and there, and she's not quite Dreadhorde General, but she's not a mile away from it either. And I think that, man, if you played this and then cast Alrund's Epiphany, that's really nasty. You get the drain and you get another turn to dig 3 more cards deep for another Epiphany. It's kind of crazy.
That's true. I do want to caution people about that +1. So one of the issues with 6-mana planeswalkers is that they tend to come down a bit later in the game. So there could be situations in which you're in a really tight spot and you would love to be able to use that +1 to like dig for a Wrath or something, but you might be kind of on the ropes. So that's one thing to think about. I think people assume that because you have the Magecraft ability, you're just going to be gaining a whole bunch of life. Sometimes you're not fortunate like that. So it's something to think about. I think that loss of life is going to come up a little bit more than you think it will.
I agree. I'm the person who's died to Treacherous Blessing more than most.
Yes. So just keep an eye out for it. I'm just saying, keep an eye out for it. The other thing, that -3, okay, -3 is better in Commander, right? But yeah. I would say that for like standard or historic 1v1 formats, it's quite a bit worse than Destroy Target Creature, I think. It has a few, upsides, right? Like can hit Toskies or indestructible creatures or whatever. But I think that just like pound for pound, I don't know, just like your opponent sacking a creature that might not be the creature you're most worried about is, I don't know.
See, I see that, and I think the worst case is like they have a Torbrand, but they sack their Bone Crusher Giant, right? And you're mad about that. I look at this.
That's the kind of thing I'm thinking.
I look at this and I'm like, Mono White has their Selfless Savior and have their Alcide, and this gets around it and gets straight to the Hollow Blade or the Halvar. So I look at it like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know though. Like this card doesn't read to me as being good against small creature decks, right? I feel like you want that -3 to hit something pretty big. Otherwise, it just doesn't really seem worth it to me.
Halvar is not small, and neither is that Hollow Blade when they're done with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know though. I would most of the time be botting out my Professor Onyx if I was playing against an aggro creature deck. I think, in my mind, this card seems like this card could be like a control mirror breaker. It could prey on mid-range decks. That's kind of more the direction I'm imagining this card going.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do think it's very powerful. I think it's one of the more powerful reveals so far.
It is. And that Magecraft ability in the right deck is an absolute killer. So yeah, don't underestimate that. All right, let's move along here. We have another Planeswalker in the form of Rowan, Scholar of Sparks. So why don't you take us through this one, CGB?
Rowan, Scholar of Sparks is 2 and a red for a legendary Planeswalker. Rowan, instant and sorcery spells you cast costs 1 less is the passive ability. This enters with 2 loyalty, and this is a double face card. So this is going to take a minute. Bear with me. The +1 on the Rowan side. Rowan, Scholar of Sparks, deals 1 damage to each opponent. If you've drawn 3 or more cards this turn, she deals 3 damage to each opponent instead. The -4 ability on this side. You get an emblem with, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay 2 mana. If you do, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Flip it. The other side is Will, the Scholar of Frost, who it costs 4 and a blue. This has 4 loyalty and has the same passive. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. The +1 up to 1 target creature has base power and toughness 0-2 until your next turn. The -3 says you draw 2 cards. The -7 says exile up to 5 target permanents. For each permanent exiled this way. Its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. What do you think of Will, the Scholar of Frost, and Rowan, the Scholar of Sparks?
I, what the heck, man? There's a lot of text on this card. I will honestly say that there was not a single line of text on this card that made me like sit up in my chair, you know? there was nothing about this card other than maybe like the flagrant self-absorption of the characters on it, which really caught my attention. Clearly it was designed clearly it was designed to work together, right? To play well with itself like these tend to be. So you can kind of see what they did there, right? When it has the +1 of Rowan is supposed to play nicely with the -3 of Will. But that all just seems like kind of best case scenario thinking to me. Honestly, I don't really know what we're trying to do with this Planeswalker. So I would have to see a pretty compelling shell to put this in. Now, here's the thing. So this Magecraft thing is definitely looking like a thing. And so I could see a deck, if the Magecraft payoffs were good enough, and if we had enough good instants and sorceries to play in the format, I could perhaps see some kind of like cantrip heavy, interaction heavy deck, which has like some Magecraft creatures or whatever in it. And then this card just like butters all of the sides of your bread, and so you want to run it. But that's kind of like the best case scenario for this card, and I'm struggling to. I feel like we're unlikely to see a fantastic ceiling for this card, and the floor seems very, very low.
I feel like there's so much text, and you could go and break down each line, and very few of the lines I think matter nearly as much as instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So if you can build a deck that mostly relies on instants and sorceries, there are a lot of good ones in the format. And the interesting thing about playing multiple Rowan and Wills is that if you cast Will and Rowan, each side has the instant and sorceries cost 1 less passive. So if you have them both out, you're paying 2 less on your instants and sorceries. So I mean, is Storm going to come back in standard? It would take a lot of very specific cards to be printed, but there are a lot of interesting effects. We're going to get to lessons and learning as we go through this spoiler, and there are spells, and you can picture those cards when we talk about them. The rate's going to suck. We're going to be like, God, those lessons are expensive. But then when you cut 2 off their casting cost, they're not. They're very interesting. And I just picture like you can play this with some of the other cards in the format, but like Behold the Multiverse. Would you like to pay 1 blue for Behold the Multiverse after a foretell, or like 1 in a blue without foretelling it? Like, that's pretty good. Graven Lore could cost less. That can be interesting, and you can still get 2 scries in there from some snow. I mean, there are things.
I think one of the things I'm having a hard time with, which you were kind of highlighting there, or perhaps hinting at the end, though, is that I find that decks that have a lot of spells in them tend to want to have a lot of cheap spells in them. And I mean, you know, that's a generalization I'm making, but it generally tends to be true. So decks that get payoffs for playing instants and sorceries want to play a lot of cards like Opt, for example. And the first 1 less to cast is often really game breaking if it sticks around. The second one, I'm not like rushing to write home to my mom about how I got that. It's nice if you get it, right? But I think that there are going to be a lot of spells where you're not even going to see the benefit. I think that the foretell spells actually kind of highlight one of the limitations of that, is that you already have these mechanics to reduce the cost of the spells. So I'm not saying it's not going to come up, and I'm not saying it doesn't have the potential to be good when it happens, but I feel like the first one-off is really where you're getting your money, I think.
Yeah, my honest take on the cards is that they don't defend themselves, and I don't have a lot of hope for them right now. They would take things breaking the right way. Like I said, Storm kind of has to come back. I think you have to combo off with these. You have to do a million things in a turn cycle, or you're just going to play this past the turn and have it die and you got one off of your Behold the Multiverse. That's not good enough.
No, I mean, Rowan, spending 3 mana on Rowan and having her come down as a 3 loyalty planeswalker, and the only thing you got out of it was dealing 1 to your opponent. It's not hot, man. It's just...
She's hot.
I mean...
Just to be clear.
She is hot, but the planeswalker utility you're getting out of her leaves something to be desired, right? So I think that, honestly, that's what kills me about the card. Like, Will is meh. I mean, Will's actually not super exciting either. But yeah, Rowan's really what's killing it for me. Well, why don't we keep things moving along here? So the next card that I want to talk about here is Dragon's Guard Elite. Now, this is 1 and a green, 2/2 creature human druid at rare. And it has the Magecraft ability, so this is cool. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Dragon's Guard Elite. And it has an activated ability for green, so you can do this as many times as you like, double the number of +1/+1 counters on Dragon's Guard Elite. So this is a card with potential, I would say.
Do you like it more than like a Quirion Dryad? Because that's been in standard for a while and nobody's even touching that card, which says if you cast any spell that isn't just strictly mono green, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So yeah. I looked at this card and I was like, I like that it starts at a 2/2 instead of a 1/1 like Quirion Dryad. As soon as you start casting spells that grow this, you're doing okay. But I mean, it feels like an Is It card. It feels like a Sprite Dragon type card, and it's green. So
yeah, it is in the wrong color.
What is the green deck that's going to cast a ton of spells? Now, Magecraft is a pushed ability for the set, so we might get that.
Yeah.
But if you just handed me this card in standard right now, I probably wouldn't look at it twice. The types are also rough. Doesn't really help with party. Doesn't really play with the elves or anything like that. I don't think it's... on its own, I don't think it's enough.
I would agree with that. And it's kind of interesting because one of the first things I wanted to say was, how does this play with adventures, right? Because that's probably a good place to start with a card like this. Unfortunately, I still don't know if it's enough. Like, how many times would you like 2/2s that grow over time in standard? I don't know, man. Like, unless they're really going off. Like, here's an example of what we want a card like this to be doing. You know that 1/3 angel that gets buffed when you play another angel?
Yeah.
Right? So that card is taking off in Historic in the Angels deck because it's a flyer and because it just freaking gets bonkers out of control very, very quickly and just fits everything that deck's trying to do. So for this card to see play, I feel like it needs to have that power level. It needs to be kind of just growing and checking other boxes for you.
Let me put it like this to you. If you play this card and then cast a spell and put a counter on it, and then cast another spell and put a counter on it, you still can't attack because they have Lovestruck Beast.
Exactly. So
and that was doing it. Like, you did it.
Well, and I was just thinking, I was like, let's say you put this in Naya Adventures, but honestly, I'd rather just be casting a Clarion Spirit. I'd rather just be doing all of the other things that deck's doing. So yeah, this card definitely needs to be paying you in some pretty significant ways. But, it's a cheap card. It can grow. It has options. All right. Do you want to hit Archmage Emeritus?
Archmage Emeritus is 2 and a blue for a human wizard. That is a 2/2 creature. A blue card, guys. At rare. I'm in heaven. All right. This 2/2 for 4 mana human wizard has an ability, as you might expect. It is Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. What do you think of this?
I mean, honestly, all I can think of is like nice Frostbite, bro. Nice Bone Crusher Giant, bro.
Get stomped, bro.
Nice 4 mana 2/2, bro. I don't know what universe this card is playable in, but I'm struggling.
We need to generate a ton of mana. We need to put this on the battlefield and cast and copy a bunch of things on the same turn and draw a lot of cards. And I don't think we live in that world.
No,
No,
no.
no.
Honestly, decks that like have a big combo that go off are usually trying to kill you anyway. They're not trying to draw a billion cards, right? So it's just hard for me to imagine this card, frankly, ever seeing serious play anywhere ever.
It reminds me of like a really old card. Back when you had Tolarian Academy and you could just like put this down and generate 50 mana on turn 2. And yeah, exactly. Hopefully we don't live in that world.
Yeah, this is the kind of card which like Magic players in the 90s would like lean in hushed tones and discuss, but we're just kind of beyond that. This next, oh no, sorry, I mistook this for another card. Okay, we've reached our first lesson. So let's just discuss the lesson mechanic, right? So, and I think you've probably done a little bit more homework on this one than I have.
Okay,
cool.
So
I made a joke there. Anyway,
you did. I missed it.
Okay, so
No.
lessons are spells that you can put them in your deck if you want, right?
Okay. Yes, you can put them in your deck, but you can also have them in your sideboard.
They're not designed to go straight into your deck, I think.
Probably not. I don't think that you could, but probably not, because...
Right? So they go in your sideboard, and there are cards in the set which have what's the mechanic called? Is it study?
It's called learn. There is one just above the card you're looking at and to the right if you need like the text for any reason.
Right. Yeah. So it's just a keyword. It says learn, and the learn, I'll just read the oracle text. So you may reveal a lesson card you own from outside the game in your sideboard and put it into your hand or discard a card to draw a card. So we are given to believe, and we've already seen that there are going to be a number of cards in the set which just have the keyword mechanic learn on them. And so it's an interesting mechanic because it's versatile. You can just, any lesson, you can nab it from the sideboard, right? And it's also cool because if you decide that there are not any lessons in your sideboard that you're currently excited to grab, you can instead do that. I guess they usually call it a rummage ability, which is discard first and then draw. So a fairly versatile keyword, and it's probably going to have like the amount that people want to play it is going to have everything to do with what the lessons are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my plebs take on it. Now I know that you, Covertgoblue, who are the one and best of one, probably have some additional thoughts on this mechanic.
It's very exciting because it allows you to have a use for the sideboard in best of one. We know that I like to build wish boards with Granted from Fae of Wishes or Raven's Warning in a lot of my decks. I also like to come up with obscure scenarios. Like if I run Tybalt or Robber of the Rich in any of my decks, I like to believe that what if I were to steal my opponent's Fae of Wishes and cast Granted, I need to have a sideboard in case that ever happens. So I'm building sideboards for like a Rakdos aggro deck that never gets used. But when it comes to lessons, you now have a use for those sideboard slots. You can fill them up with the various lesson cards and put some learn cards in your main deck, and you have access to those sideboard cards. You definitely would rather go to your sideboard and grab a lesson than do the rummage effect most of the time. If you're doing the rummage effect instead, hopefully it's because you have a card that you want in the graveyard, like maybe you wanted to put Kroxa in your graveyard so you could bring it out on turn 4. But for the most part, you get strict card advantage if you go to your sideboard and grab a card that was otherwise not available to you and put it in your hand, as opposed to discarding a card to draw a card. So the next question becomes, with card advantage built into all the cards that say learn, because they do automatically replace themselves, kind of like an adventure, are the lessons good enough? Like, are they worth fetching and finding to make the other spell castable? So on one hand, you're going to look at the card that says learn on it and has that mechanic and try to judge whether or not this card is worth playing. If it also said on it draw/tutor for a card. And then you have to look at the lessons and say, are those worth searching for? So it's an interesting double-sided mechanic. And the first card you're going to read here, I think that's where we're going with this, is a lesson. So it's one of the cards you could tutor for.
Yeah, and just before I read this lesson, I want to say that my assumption, and I think the general design philosophy of mechanics like this, is that the card that you play that learns is probably not worth a full card most of the time. Or at least it shouldn't be. If you played like an already fantastic playable card, which also had learn on it, and you also had cards from your sideboard that you wanted to get, then it would actually be kind of busted, right? So my assumption is that most learn cards are going to be like a little bit not playable enough. And then my assumption as well is that most of the lessons, if not all of them, are also going to be cards that are not quite worth a card. But your hope is that together they average out to make more than the value of a card in your deck, right?
Here's what I got for you. Ready? We're going to call this the Lesson Keeper. And Lesson Keeper is a 1-mana 1/1 that gives all your spells learn. Just kidding.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. That's not a real card. But they might print something in the set that gives like all your instants and sorceries learn or something like that. You just got to watch out for that.
Kind of bonkers. Kind of bonkers. Okay, so let's read our first lesson here. This is a black spell sorcery lesson. It is called Confront the Past. The casting cost is X and 1 black, and it says choose one. First bullet point, return target planeswalker card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is nice. Return to the battlefield is always a nice effect. The second one is remove twice X loyalty counters from target planeswalker and opponent controls. So the idea is it hopefully either reanimates one of yours or kills one of your opponents. So of course the playability of this card entirely depends on the planeswalkers you might be running or the planeswalkers you're worried your opponent runs. I think it's just, I don't know that we can say much more about this card because it's just so dependent on the format and it's so dependent on the learn cards.
Yeah, we need we need to be a deck that plays these planeswalkers, or the opponent needs to have a deck that plays decent planeswalkers. And I'm not convinced about that. Also, notably, like Valky, like this can remove counters from a Valky, but you can't get one back because in the graveyard, Valky's not a planeswalker.
Yeah, that's a little awkward.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway, just honestly, I don't feel like we can much evaluate it. It's more just interesting to think of the possibilities of this card.
I will say this is the kind of lesson I want. I want there to be lessons like this that target a specific type of card. So I want a lesson that can kill a planeswalker. I want a lesson that can kill an enchantment. I want a lesson that can kill an artifact, etc., etc. And it doesn't have to be at a perfect cost, just a good cost. Because remember, the learn card, like it has text as well. And then the learning part is just the extra upside. So the lesson just has to be reasonable cost that can solve a problem or keep pressure on the opponent. And I'm in for it.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if in this set they haven't, but imagine if they did print like a cancel, right? 1 blue counter target spell that also has learn on it.
I'm in.
Right?
Done.
You would be into that, wouldn't
go.
you? That would be frickin' gas, right? So the question is, how bad does a card have to be with learn on it for us to just be like auto include, right? Like, how bad does our shock have to be? How bad does our counter spell have to be? How bad does our normally playable card have to be to have learn on it and make us just like, boom, I'm on it?
Yep. We answered this question with adventure, right? Like when people looked at Bonecrusher Giant, they were like, well, 3 mana 4/3 or 2 mana shock, ew. But then you're like, no, it's 2 mana shock and 3 mana 4/3. And both of those cards on their own are questionable for standard, but when you put them on one card, it became the most played card in the format at various points.
Yeah. Gangbusters, right? So that's what we're looking for. Okay, so let's keep going along here. So the first learn card which stood out to me as a card that I was just started to think about. Do you want to read Professor of Symbology?
This is a 1 and a white 2/1 core cleric, and when Professor of Symbology enters the battlefield, learn. So that's the other side of what we just talked about. Enters the battlefield, go to your sideboard, fetch a card from there that is a lesson type card, put it in your hand, or discard a card in your hand and draw. So what do you think of the Professor?
I mean, here's what I think. If you're in a deck which wants to play cheap creatures, this is a core cleric. So if this card basically said 2/1 relevant creature type for 2 mana, which draws you a card which might be relevant, I'm definitely curious. Like, you have my attention, right?
Oh yeah, that's better than Elvish Visionary.
I mean, it's a really good card. So the only question is, what are the lessons that we might get with this? And if any of them are like even remotely good enough, I'm definitely interested in making space in my white deck for this card.
Yeah, I talked about this one on stream, and I think that it's really notable that there's another card next to it called Pop Quiz, so I'm going to read it quickly just to draw a comparison. It's 2 and a blue for an instant that says draw a card, and then learn. So at a glance, it sounds like 2 and a blue to draw 2 cards, one of which is a lesson from your sideboard, and the other of which is a random card off the top. And I think that Professor of Symbology is a lot better. And the way I want to explain this is when you're playing a threat, you can afford to pay more for free answers. And one of the cards that I think illustrates this the best is Robber of the Rich. How many times have you fallen way behind or lost because Robber of the Rich cast cards that didn't even play well with the opponent's deck? They were like overpriced, mostly do-nothings because they weren't built to synergize with the opponent's red deck. But just the fact that they had something to do that like helped keep the pressure on, because Robber of the Rich was creating pressure. Professor of Symbiology creates pressure. You can afford to take a clunky turn to maybe generate a little bit of value. As long as you're also applying pressure, it's something the opponent has to answer. That's much more effective than cards that don't produce pressure. It's why generally aggro and mid-range decks are better than control decks. Like a control deck has to be tuned to the meta. In a vacuum, a control deck is rarely good. But aggro decks can just provide threats. As long as they keep doing stuff, the better it gets. Like, we'll get to some lessons that are insanely overcosted for what they do. I don't think that matters, though, if you hit for lethal. You know, if you are attacking and dealing damage, you can pay 5 for a bad removal spell if it gets you the last 2 points of damage to win. So this card, I think, might be the best card spoiled so far.
This card could be absolutely bonkers. Like, it really could. And you make a really excellent point. Like, one of the biggest issues with, decks that play cheap cards in general and decks that play cheap aggro cards, that they do run out of gas, especially if they mulligan, especially if this, especially if that. And so the ability for them to turn their lands, which in the late game, apart from Faceless Haven, are usually kind of useless in a deck like that, in order for them to be able to, you've spent the whole game playing this resource, which now that you're empty-handed is essentially a useless resource. In order to be able to turn that into even a mediocre spell, it doesn't matter how much you cast for it if you can cast the dang thing, right? So yeah, I totally agree. It's just, I don't know, man. I'm looking out for those learn spells, and this card's got my blood racing a little bit.
Is this better than Thraben Inspector?
It could be. It could easily be.
I mean, and Thraben Inspector didn't look like anything and turned into a multi-format superstar. And I mean, just a must-have 4 of in every standard deck that was white for years. Yeah.
This is the kind of card, like, people might play it on turn 2 and you have a Bone Crusher and you still felt like you lost in the exchange, right? Could happen.
Yeah, good card.
Happen. All right. Are there any other cards? Do you think Witherbloom Apprentice is kind of worth paying attention to?
All of the apprentices are worth paying attention to, in that if we have the right mix of spells, they could be useful, but they're all dependent on instant or sorcery spells and how good Magecraft is. And I have a feeling that, at least what we've seen so far and what I expect them to introduce, that none of them will be good enough. I think they're all stomp bait, and that the payoffs won't be there.
Okay, so maybe we'll skip on reading the apprentices for now.
I think that's fair.
I kind of agree with you. I think the apprentices are basically as good as the magecraft ability ends up being. And that's just so that's something to look out for. Okay, cool. Okay. This next card, is it your turn to read, CGB? You know what? I'm gonna ask you to read this card anyway. Shadrix Silverquill.
You're
Because I
always
know that you
welcome.
had some feelings.
You are always welcome to ask me to read a card if you're not sure. Like, that is fine by me. All right. We're going to read Shadrix here, or Shadrix. I'm going to make that mistake a lot. Anyway, 3 white and black. This is the Silverquill, aka Orzhov, Elder Dragon. Legendary creature, Elder Dragon, mythic. 2/5 stat line, so 2 power, 5 toughness. Abilities, flying and double strike. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may choose 2. Each mode must target a different player. Mode 1, target player creates a 2/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying. Mode 2, target player draws a card and loses 1 life. Mode 3, target player puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature they control. Arjuna, did you notice when I read these abilities that they all sound very good for the person that they are targeted?
Yes. Yes.
But one of them has to target an opponent, Arjuna. What's going on with this card?
One of them actually has to target each opponent. So you might make some friends in Commander. Shadrix, I want to call Shadrix like the Dragon of Christmas, right? Shadrix just wants everyone to have fun. It's, it's kind of like Oprah. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car.
It's so not Silverquill, from what I understand, is kind of the like evil, cocky, that's the way it came off to me. Like the really boisterous out, maybe they're talking about me. Anyway, I don't get it. Why are we trying to help our opponents?
It's the silver lining, CGB. It's the silver lining, So, okay. So, you know what card this reminds me of the most, just thematically, is Rankle. I think that in order to evaluate this card, we should compare it to Rankle. I remember when Rankle was spoiled, people looked at it and they were like, does this card kind of suck?
They were?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of people were skeptical of that card.
Rewind the tape. I want to know what we said.
They were like, it dies to, insert deal 3 here. And it, it has a downside that you pay as well as your opponent. Like, that's not good. I just don't think this card's going to be good. And then it ended up being surprisingly good. Now, I'm not saying that Shadrix is going to be the same way. What I will say is that the whole point of Rankle being good was that you had plenty of opportunities to manipulate what happened in a way that was better for you than the opponent. That was the whole point of the card, right? And so in order for this card to be good in a 1v1 game, it has to line up such that you're always getting a better deal than your opponent, and that it kind of justifies the worth of the card. Now, unfortunately, Shadrix not having haste and costing 5 mana is a huge strike against it. So that's honestly, you know what, man? Honestly, I don't even know that we need to discuss much more than that. Like, this is what I see is a 5 mana 2/5 flyer that doesn't have haste, and I'm kind of over it already. So I don't know.
I do want to point out, like, when you read the text at first, you might, like, I know a lot of people that got the wrong idea. You may choose 2. You can choose nothing, but if you choose something, you have to choose 2. You can't choose up to 2. Like, okay, you can't. That's good to know. You can't choose 1 and just do one of the things to yourself and not do something to your opponent. You either choose 0 or you choose 2. Yeah. So your opponent gets something, no matter what, when you choose that.
So I just want to give you all a tip. I would suggest, if you're playing this card, I would suggest against giving your opponent the 2/1 flyer. I would just
unless you control Karvek the Spiteful.
Could be. Yep, that could be gas. Although then you're only hitting for 2, so
Well,
that's
you put a
kind of
+1/+1 counter on each creature you control. See?
that's true.
See?
You could,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could. So
yeah.
there you go. You're proving the point, CGB.
No, this card
Um,
sucks.
um, so
This,
yeah,
this is
but
bulk mythic.
yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I just don't recommend playing this card. Okay, cool. Can we move on?
Yes.
All right. Next we have always one of the most important things to discuss in a spoiler, the rare land cycle of the set. These are dual lands, and CGB, what are we calling these? What's the lay person's term for these?
My favorite was Showland.
The show lands. I like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you explain to the peoples what the mechanic is here?
An example of a Showland is Frostboil Snare, which reads tap for blue or red, and as Frostboil Snare enters the battlefield, you may reveal an island or mountain from your hand. If you don't, this card enters the battlefield tapped. So when you are playing these cards, if you have a card of the type of mana they produce, that land type in your hand, you can reveal it to your opponent and you get an untapped source. Otherwise, you get less than a temple. You get a tapped land. These also do not have types. So, the card I just read is not an island/mountain like the common snowlands were in Kaldheim. So that's important because if you draw an opening hand and you have a Shuffler's Find moment where you have 3, for example, Frostboil Snares, they all enter the battlefield tapped until you draw an island or mountain to reveal. So that's an important little point.
Yep. And sorry to be the actually guy, but they are all snarls. SNARL.
Oh, so we just call them the Snarls.
We just call them the snarl lands, man.
The Snarl lands?
Every time you play, you have to be like, so yeah, these lands definitely ask questions of you. I feel like, okay, this is what I feel like, especially in Historic, like when you line all of the lands up in front of you, you have to really like have a grown-up conversation with yourself about exactly what you want your mana base to look like. Because I'll tell you what, these cards do not just go into every deck. So let's take, for example, a 3-color deck. You might be like, I need dual colored lands in my 3-color deck, and I run triomes. So that seems like a perfect place to play this card. Okay. But here are some of the challenges you might run into. You're already running triomes. Okay. And then you're running these lands. And then how many like just actually untapped lands are you going to be running in your deck? Are you going to be running Fabled Passage? Are you going to be running Pathways? Neither of those synergize particularly well with this card. And I want to speak especially to the triome thing. You might look at this and be like, well, a triome is... Okay, that's true, right? But one of the 2 of these is going to come in tapped. And so it's not like it's not going to kind of big brain your curve quite in the way that you're thinking it's going to, right? So you have like... So here's an example. Oftentimes, if you have an opening hand with a triome in it, you want to play it out turn 1 because that's often the turn that you're least likely to want to use that mana. If you do that, then the rest of your snarls in your hand come in tapped. Like vice versa, you can play this on turn 1 untapped, but then at some point in your curve, you're going to play a tap land that might hurt you a lot more than it would have on turn 1. So these are the kinds of things that you have to be a grown-up and think about when you're building your mana base.
Yep, Pathways won't cut it. Fabled Passage, notably, won't cut it. Triome will, but it does mean you'll have a tap land later, which you're going to pay for that tempo at some point. So this is a rough one. When this cycle was in Standard, like I think, no, Prairie Stream wasn't this one. What was it called? God, I still have it in a binder somewhere. But anyway,
yeah.
The allied colored ones were in Standard, and one of the lessons that was learned was that you probably don't run 4 because drawing multiples is bad, and you really don't want it to be your top deck later in the game. You really like having it in your opening hand with another basic, but they do cannibalize themselves, and especially with Pathways and Fabled Passage is really common fixing. I think these will get played, but I think we should learn the lesson, and we probably shouldn't run 4. We'll probably start that way, but when it all comes down to it, we probably shouldn't. I just remember watching a lot of coverage at the time from Star City Games, and it just Patrick Sullivan and Cedric Phillips, two of the best commentators for watching competitive Magic of all time, just seemed to have a running game of every single time somebody played one of these, it entered the battlefield tapped, and it got to a point where they just busted up laughing every time someone needed to draw land. It was one of these off the top, and it entered the battlefield tapped, and the person was in much worse position for it, and they just got to a point where every time it happened they just laughed.
Yep It's a thing. So my hot take on these lands, the place that I first want to put them, like the place I first want to go with these lands, is in a 2-color deck in Standard, which wants some fast mana. And the reason for that is that if you go down the playable lands in a 2-color deck in Standard, you're going to end up with like 14 basics or like 16 basics, right? Which is, I think, enough. Like if your deck is just a lot of basics, then you can get away with cards like this a lot more. It's not that they're not going to bite you, but this might statistically come into play untapped more often than a Fabled Passage, for example. So that's where I would be looking. Like, I think a deck, let's say you have a 24 land deck, which runs 4 pathways, 4 snarls, and then a bunch of basics. I think that's a solid start to your mana base.
It's better than it's been recently. Yep. That's fine.
Right. So that's the first place I would put these. I would definitely think long and hard before trying to put one of these in a 3-color mana base. That seems like danger territory to me.
Yeah, I'll probably mess with it, but when you have 12 pathways in your deck, this starts to look really bad.
Yeah. There are a few other things that could make these a little better. Let's say that you're playing Birth of Meletus. A card like that could make a card like this a little better, right?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. I'm just thinking. These are the kind of things that might sway you one way or the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't just these are not going to be they're not going to be pathways, right? They're not just going to be jamming Forov into all of these decks just by default.
Agreed.
Cool. Okay. Next card here, Uvilda, Dean of Perfection, 2 and a blue, legendary creature, Djinn Wizard at rare. It is a 2/2. It is also a DFC. The first side reads, tap, and then a lot of text. You may CGB just sitting back in his chair, getting hydrated. It's going to be a long road, my friend. Yeah, he's going to read his phone, maybe do a little exercising over there. Meanwhile, tap, you may exile an instant or sorcery card from your hand and put 3 hone. I'm reading that right. Hone counters on it.
You know what rhymes with hone?
CGB. I can't focus.
Phone rhymes with hone.
Yeah, yeah, right. A phone counter on it. So, so, Adult Arjuna intervenes. You may exile an instant or sorcery card from your hand and put 3 hone counters on it. It gains at the beginning of your upkeep. If this card is exiled, remove a hone counter from it. And when the last hone counter is removed from this card, if it's exiled, you may cast it. It costs 4 colorless mana less to cast this way. So what's the mechanic? It's called layaway or something. You know what I'm talking about? Suspend. That's it.
But
it reminds us.
But you're not.
Suspend.
You got more work to do. You're not.
There
done.
is more.
Yeah.
There is in fact.
You're not
more
done.
Work for my poor vocal cards to do.
Yeah. Come on.
The backside is a red card. Nasari, Dean of Expression. 3 red. Legendary creature, Efreet, Shaman at 4/4. It also has a lot of text on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile a top card of each opponent's library. Until the end of turn, you may cast spells from among those exiled spells, and you may spend mana as though a mana of any color to cast those spells. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on Nasari, Dean of Expression. I sure hope that's the last time I ever have to read this card, Covertgoblue.
Good job. Adult Arjuna showed up for work, rolled up the sleeves, got the job done. And you I want to honor the hard work you put into reading all that text with my very brief review. This card sucks.
You know what I just read? I read a eulogy.
Yeah. I mean, okay, it's command. I think it's fair to say commander card because it doesn't provide anything at a rate that I think is reasonable for a constructed competitive format.
I mean, hard agree. Just look at the conditionals on this card. One of the metrics I use to assess how good cards are how many conditional things have to happen. Okay. So first of all, 3 mana 2/2 has to live until your next turn. Not great. Okay. Second thing, you may exile an instant or sorcery card from your hand. So you have to have one of those in your hand. That's the second thing that you need. The third of all, it needs to be a card that you're going to be happy to cast how many turns from now? 4 turns from now? Okay. And Covertgoblue, it then has to be a card which on that turn you're going to be stoked about costing 4 less to cast. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen.
There better be some game winners. Like, there have to be some absolute bangers for this.
Oh, my goodness.
Why does it say you may?
Yeah, you may.
Why would you tap this?
Supposing you don't want to.
If you don't have it. You can tap this to do literally nothing. Just wanted to let you know.
Hey, man, I don't know. Sometimes people resolve in a Crone War against me, and I just need to save my creature, dude. You know?
My gosh, it can't come back from a Crone War. One more strike against it. It can't miss.
So that's the first side of the card. I literally never want to resolve that spell in my life. Does the back side of it do anything for us?
It's better, I think, but it's still low rate. And there, again, you have to exile the top card of each opponent's library. When you see each opponent, you should probably think commander, especially on a legendary creature. And then you may cast spells. So if you exile a land, you did nothing. Congratulations. You helped your opponent scry to a more relevant card. Good work. And then if you cast a spell from exile, which could be an adventure or a foretold card or things like that, it gets a +1/+1 counter. For this card to be good, I expected to exile target permanent whenever you cast a spell from exile. And then I'd be like, okay, this might just be interesting. Could be a banger. But I mean, for a +1/+1 counter, I get that from Showdown of the Scalds, and it comes with 4 spells. For less mana.
Yeah.
Like,
this,
no.
This not only reads to me like a commander card, it reads to me like a bad commander card.
Yeah, I don't even want to build a deck with this for commander, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel like I would build a meme deck with this in commander that was like all 7 mana instants and sorceries, and then just whichever side I felt like casting for the lols, probably expecting to lose every game. That's the kind of deck that I would build with this. All right. How about this lesson that we're looking at here, CGB?
You want me to read Expanded Anatomy, that one?
I feel like maybe we should read all the lessons.
Okay. Expanded Anatomy is a colorless lesson sorcery. 3 generic mana. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains vigilance until end of turn.
Right.
Is this the one? Is this what you want to learn?
I mean, this is an example of a lesson I'd probably like to leave in limited, personally. But just to give people an idea of what a common lesson looks like.
I can see, so like when I'm playing certain white decks, there are times where I just really want a Sentinel's Eyes. And we already talked about that there's the white creature that looks like a very good learner. And so I feel like maybe this has a home as a one of in the sideboard of that very, very specific deck. It's a common, we'll see.
Yeah. Creatures that get double strike, stuff like that.
If you're playing best of one, if you're playing best of one, there's no reason not to. I doubt we're going to have 15 lessons that fit our color scheme to fill the sideboard. So, I mean, I think this will happen maybe once every 200 to 300 games of Magic. You might fetch this one.
I feel like what I've seen from these not busted lessons so far is that they tend to be A of all, a spell you probably wouldn't want to cast, and B of all, at least 1 mana more expensive than you'd want to spend on it.
Yep.
But again, in best of one, that could still be enough.
Yep.
So here's another lesson that I would definitely consider putting in my sideboard. Introduction to Annihilation, 5 mana, colorless sorcery lesson at common, exile target non-land permanent. Its controller draws a card. So this is basically what you were talking about earlier, CGB, as being a surprisingly reasonable kind of finisher, push my damage through kind of card in an aggressive deck.
Yeah, an answer in generic mana to any permanent type. This is kind of new. So as long as there is a learn card in your color combination, and I have a feeling there will be learn cards throughout the color combinations in this set, as long as you have a learn card in your deck, you now have an out to a permanent on the battlefield that you may not have had before. Every day, I still make and play against decks that have 0 outs to artifacts or 0 outs to enchantments. The color pie just doesn't allow for reasonably priced outs to those things. And now you have an unreasonably priced one, but it doesn't take up a spot in your deck. It's something you can fetch when you have to, and it's better definitely for aggro decks, because it doesn't matter if you paid 5 for it. It doesn't matter if it was sorcery speed. And it doesn't even matter if the controller draws a card if you attack for lethal after casting it. So I think it's just much better if you can have an aggressive leaned deck.
I wonder if this card is going to end up hitting more Great Henges and Embercleaves than we might imagine in the format. It's an interesting card to have access to, right? It's the kind of thing which, again, if you're playing like a playable lesson card in your deck, it might kind of curve nicely. Obviously, it's not what you would ideally want to be doing, but like, how many times does your opponent just slam they slam their turn for a henge or something, and you look at your hand and you're like, oh crap, I didn't draw my sideboard cards, or I'm playing best of one and I don't run a Shatter main deck or whatever. That card's going to kill me. And just being able to fish this out and take it out, even at kind of a bad mana cost, could be really good.
I think it's also interesting to note that this isn't just different permanent types. It's also effects like indestructible, protection from X. Like, those are things that also normally sometimes you look across the table and the game's just over because you can't deal with this thing. And this gets around those as well. Not hexproof and shroud, but around protection, I think, is particularly interesting across the formats.
Yes. And it being a colorless spell can matter. No one's going to mystical dispute this, no one's going to ether gust it, stuff like that. So anyway, I think that this card might end up being surprisingly playable. This next one, I'm not so sure about. Introduction to Prophecy, 3 mana sorcery lesson at common, scry 2, then draw a card. Do we bother with this?
You'll put it in the wish board if you're playing best of one, because we need to fill our board. And sometimes, here's the thing. If mana is tight and you don't want to spend a turn paying 3 mana for this effect, you'd probably rather do the rummage, the discard a card and draw a card off your... if you need that card right now and mana is tight. But if it's late game and you have a ton of mana, this, like, fetching and casting this is better than discarding a card to draw a card if mana's not a problem, right? So I think it will be an option. I just don't think it will be the first or most likely one, but it's not terrible, and you may as well have it.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And, definitely playable in a control-y deck in the late game when you have a lot of mana and you're just trying to find either your finisher or that one counter spell you need to lock up the game. Could be playable. Yeah. All right. How about read Valentin for us?
Valentin, Dean of the Vein, is 1 black legendary creature, vampire warlock with menace and lifelink. It is a 1/1 creature. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you do, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with the ability, when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. And there's a flip side, as with all the Deans. The flip side is Lisette, Dean of the Root. This is 2 green, so 4 total mana for a 4/4 legendary creature, human druid. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures gain trample until end of turn. What do you think of the Dean of the green-black house that I'm not calling Golgari, but totally might remember the name of any second now?
I'm not good with them either, to be honest. Witherbloom,
you win. You get
Witherbloom.
Points. Okay.
So the first things first, I think that the joke here is that you're supposed to make some number of 1/1s with the front side and then eventually pump them and kind of overrun your opponent on the back side. You do all of this extremely slowly, by the way. So let's look at the front side here. To me, the most relevant text on this card, just in the dark, in a constructed context, is if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. That has been very relevant text in the past in a number of matchups. For example, this is kind of a cat hoser. It hoses both sides of the cat oven combo. So that's something to note. Apart from that, I don't know, man. Like, how often are we really paying the 2? I guess it's nice to have the option. But I don't know. Like, apart from that one ability, the front side's just not really doing it for me.
I mean, our creatures are 1/1s just gonna stay on the battlefield these days?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it dies to 1 Mayhem Devil activation because you still sacrifice the thing. The exile doesn't prevent that. I look at this card and I'm like, it's got abilities on both sides and it has a lot of text, and I can think of times when all of these lines would be good. And then I try to evaluate it as a package, and I'm just like, all I see is that I'm going to cast this creature, it's going to die, and I didn't get ahead. Like, or it's going to get outstatted. You know, that's also a very significant issue for this card. It very easily gets outstatted from all over the place. I think, I don't know. I have trouble seeing where I would play the card, to be honest.
I mean, I'm with you. Yep, I'm not clamoring to put this in the deck by any means. All right, how about Plarg, Dean of Chaos? I mean, if you're going to be a Dean of Chaos, you may as well have a name like Plarg. Plarg, 1 and a red. 2/2, legendary creature, orc, shaman at rare. It has a lot of text. The first line is tap, discard a card, draw a card. So this basically has the backside of lesson on it, or learn rather. It has another tap ability, pay 4 and a red and tap it. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with mana value 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put all revealed cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. So again, non-legendary, non-land card. Okay, let's take a look at the back. The back says Augusta, Dean of Order, 2 and a white for a 1/3 legendary creature, human cleric. Other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0. Other untapped creatures you control get +0/+1. Whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. Well, oh boy, is there a lot going on with this card as well.
It's another busy card.
Yeah. So let's start with the first side, CGB. I mean, definitely a lot of options. What are you thinking about here?
I still see a 2 mana 2/2 with Summoning Sickness, and if you untap with it, you might get to do something, and I don't know if any of it is worth it. 5 mana and a tap to do like a Bloodbraid Elf Cascade is definitely a lot. It's very much a nothing else is going on ability to activate. Tapping to discard a card to draw a card. Why didn't it just say learn? Like, yeah. Would that be so bad if you could just pull all these overpriced lessons into your hand from your sideboard each turn? I feel like that would be a fine card. I'm kind of surprised.
Honestly, I would be much more stoked if it just had learn instead of this ability,
Yeah, me
right?
too. Me
Just
too.
you just get it for free one time. That'd be pretty
Sure.
cool.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
if this had an ETB like that, that's an important thing to point out. I don't think any of
Yeah.
these deans have an ETB,
Yeah. It's too
and that's
bad.
gonna continue. That's consistently going to lower them in our awesomeness meter if we had such a thing. And this one is another one where I feel like they're all either A, missing at least a +1/+1 or a +1/+0 buff of stats to be relevant, or an
Yeah.
ETB.
Yeah. I totally agree. This one is just particularly random. Like, it's hard for me to develop a narrative as to how the front side works with the backside. I guess you can, whenever you attack with anything, you can like untap plug with the backside, and then I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the backside is more interesting. The
Yeah.
backside is a unique effect that you see very rarely. The statics, you could argue, like the other tap creatures you control get this and untapped creatures get that. That you could argue is like an ETB because it does something the turn it
Right.
comes into play. And then whenever you
Right.
attack, untap each creature you control, not attacking creatures you control, but each creature you control. And then you can choose to tap them again. So anything with a tap ability that is not summoning sick gets to double the amount of tap abilities they use. Anything with a tap triggered ability, the first thing to come to mind is Magda. You can untap it, then tap
Yes.
it again to trigger it twice. So you can make 2 treasures off your Magda in one attack with this card.
That came to my mind as well. And it's in red, which the front side of this is.
Yeah,
So that's pretty cool.
It is whenever you attack. So you can, like, if you have your Magda sitting there, you can attack with some creature you don't care about, like a dwarf token. And then you can choose to tap your... No, you untap each creature you control, then tap a number. So you can untap the creatures that attacked or anything else that happened to be tapped, but then tap your Magda even though it didn't attack to make a treasure.
So just to be clear, that untap ability is not a May. It has to happen
Yep.
if you attack. And so that is at least one creature has to actually get in the red zone. Then all of your creatures have to untap, but then you may tap any number of them that you feel like it. So yeah, this card has a lot of just raw potential. I could definitely see it being a combo enabler. It also kind of effectively gives your whole team vigilance, like your whole team, which is pretty cool. On its own, it's basically a 1 for the turn that you play. Oh no, it's other. Scratch that. Okay. But it does immediately give the rest of your team a toughness buff. So, I mean, this doesn't jump into anything right now, but this card has a power level, I think, for sure.
Yeah, we need to see some cards that play specifically with it, and then maybe you could talk to me about this card finding a home. And it is, like, cleric is a relevant type, so that's something. And that's the human cleric on the back, the Dean of Order. So this card has more potential just by being a very unique card, doing an effect that kind of breaks the rules of Magic in a way.
Yeah, and I think that Anthem on attacking creatures is not to be underestimated in a go wide shell. So that's just another thing to think about as well. Yeah, overall, it's of all of these DFC like deans and stuff so far, this particular backside is the most interesting one to me.
I agree.
Cool. All right. Why don't you tackle Torrent Sculptor?
So this is a double-sided card, but it's not a Dean. This is Torrent Sculptor, 2 blue for a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard at rare with Ward 2. And this, what Ward is whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter it unless that player pays 2. So this is the one that's going to get people for their binding the old gods. You know, this is the one where you can choose your target, but there's no takesy backsies, and then it gets countered if you forget about Ward. So that's kind of that's a tilter, but there's there's more text.
Is this the ultimate salt mechanic, CGB?
Narset's the ultimate salt.
Okay,
mechanic.
no, I totally agree with you. This is probably the second
The Fairy Time Rattler is the other ultimate salt mechanic. Keep going.
Same set, by the way.
Anyway, more text. When Torrent Sculptor enters the battlefield, exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Put a number of +1/+1 counters on Torrent Sculptor equal to half that card's mana value, rounded up. Then there's another side. Yay! Flamethrower Sonata is 1 and a red sorcery. Discard a card, then draw a card. When you discard an instant or sorcery card this way, Flamethrower Sonata deals damage equal to that card's mana value to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. Is this card good, Arjuna?
I mean, the first thing I'm wondering is how many awful suggestions your chat has thrown you about what to do with this card. Am I right?
A couple?
Am I right?
Yes, you are right.
Everyone wants you to fling your ultimatum and feel clever, right?
Yes, they have told me that this is like Narset, which, you know, it's the Narset -2 ability is basically I liked it better when it was on a planeswalker myself, but you know, that's just me. Maybe that's not just me. Boy, honestly, it's hard for me to read this entire card without glazing over a little bit. So on the face of it, presumably, if you have an instant or sorcery, you get at least 1 +1/+1 counter on it, and then it has ward. So this card hopefully it doesn't fail the Bone Crusher test. It also makes Bone Crusher particularly painful to cast. But it's still not that great. I mean, on the face of it, right, it's just a hard to target beta. There's nothing really else going on with it, right? If it were a 5/5, you'd be happy, right?
Oh, yeah.
If it were a 4/4, probably not, because it still just loses to Lovestruck Beast, and it probably just gets removed like by Heartless Act for 4 mana as a trade. If it were a 5/5, you might get excited. That means you have to like get a Seagate Restoration into your graveyard on turn 4.
There you go.
But that's nothing about that is easy.
Maybe with all of your learning that you're doing, right? That's something to think about. Anything that says stuff in the graveyard, if we're playing learn cards, we have an opportunity to pitch things. You know,
they have to like make expensive sorceries outside of the ultimatums, instants and sorceries that are somehow like, I'm happy to put this in the graveyard, because there are a few cards using this mechanic, and I look at it right now as like, I just don't know how the heck I would want to do this. It just doesn't look compelling.
The DFCs you mentioned, that's pretty cool, right?
It's fine if you like taking 3 to play a land sometimes, and I don't. Like, I really try to avoid that in my deck building.
It also does suck that, like, one of the reasons you put lands in your deck is that you want to play lands, right? So
yes.
We don't often want to pitch our lands, maybe in the late game, but at that point, this card's probably not relevant. So, yeah.
This card also doesn't have any kind of a like Soul Seer, like that target loses indestructible, or exile it, or any of those extra bonuses that make removal spells that are conditional a little more interesting, like Blitz of the Thunder Raptor. Or it just doesn't have it. It's just a very generic but very conditional removal spell, or a creature of various worth that's probably just going to die. It'll cost the opponent more, but it'll probably just die.
Yeah, here's the other problem with the Flamethrower Sonata. Okay, so you're pitching 2 spells. You're paying 2 mana, and 2 spells leave your hand. You damage something, and you draw a random card, right? So supposing that random card you drew is not something that you wanted to draw, you've essentially 2-for-1 yourself.
Yes.
So that kind of sucks. And then if you don't have like another thing to do, I mean, I guess it's cycles, right? So you can cantrip this for 2 mana.
This is another card where I'm really just looking for, how does this come together? Like, there's got to be other cards that make this work.
Yeah, well, they're hinting at, okay, so they're already hinting in this set at a red-blue deck which plays expensive spells.
Yep.
Like, they really want you to do that. Honestly, this is not the card that's going to put me into that deck. So we're looking for the card or cards which really are going to make us be like, whoa, it's worth me playing frankly mediocre cards like this in my deck because they synergize with the theme.
Eight mana sorcery, gain control of 3 target non-land permanents. Like, okay, that's like where I'm drawing the line. Like that's what I need. Okay.
How about this? 8 mana sorcery, gain control of 3 target lands.
Yeah, I don't want that in standard No, I don't want that to come back. Let's not do that. Let's not do that, Arjuna. Please stop.
Can I interest you in a banned card? Okay. Right on. So let's talk about Kian, Dean of Substance. 2 and a green, legendary creature, elf druid, 2/2. Do I have to read this card? Okay.
Yeah, you do. You put on your big boy pants. Grown up conversation. Let's go. Let's go.
Pants. Tap to exile a target card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, put a study counter on that card and it stays exiled. 4 and a green, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. Aha, I knew there'd be more fractals. Put a +1/+1 counter on it for each different mana value among non-land cards you own in exile with study counters on them. What a sentence.
You made it to halftime. Get back in the game.
Get out there, soldier.
I can't do it for you. I can't do it for you. You're going to have to win that inch. You're going to have to earn every word.
Oh, okay. CGB on the backside. We found an owl. Is it the owl? I don't know, but it is a owl. An owl, I suppose. Grammatically correct. We went to school, right? Imbraham, Dean of Theory. 2 blue. Legendary creature, bird, wizard, 3/3 with flying. And it has an activated ability X blue and tap. Exile the top X cards of your library and put a study counter on each of them. Then you may put a card you own in exile with a study counter on it into your hand. Oh boy.
I'm sorry. I phased out after like 2 sentences. Will you please read it again?
Can we not?
No, we don't have to.
Can we just move on?
It's the same card.
I just move on.
It's the same card as several of the other Deans, where it's just understated, slow. When, where, how are we going to do any of this? Who is this card for? I don't get it.
Dean of Mediocrity.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this next Dean then?
Chalet, Dean of Radiance, is 1 and a white for a 1/1 legendary creature bird cleric that has flying and vigilance. You tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. But wait, there's another side. And on the flip side, you have Embros, the Dean of Shadow. 2 black, legendary creature, human warlock. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature. Then Embros, Dean of Shadow, deals 2 damage to that creature. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. It's a 4/4. Boom.
Skullclamp is back in standard. Heyo.
I'm going to get my thoughts out there and let you go off. This is closer. This on the front side has abilities and it taps to add a power toughness level to the battlefield, and it's cheap. It's 2 mana. That's not too bad. And on the backside, it has a potential removal option. You can target your opponent's 1 toughness creatures and kill them, or you can grow your own creatures. And it has potential card draw, where you can, when a creature with a counter dies, you draw a card. So the pieces are there. It's still really conditional. All of it needs like these certain things to be in the right places at the right time, and nothing can have summoning sickness. So I still am not hyped about it, but it at least has some potential.
It has something. I think that you summed it up pretty well. One of the nice things about cards like this is that So that passive ability of whenever a creature you control, the +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card, that can make life fairly hard for your opponents. If you're throwing around counters, it can put them in a situation where they really don't want to be trading with your creatures in combat, stuff like that. They don't want to be pointing removal at anything except this. So that kind of an ability can end up being quite a pain in the rear. It's one of the more compelling lines of text on the card. I agree with you. It's close. It also just still doesn't feel that close to me. I suppose mono white decks are in the habit of maybe dropping a couple creatures on turn 3 or something like that, but still, I don't know. I'd probably rather just be playing creatures that are good in that deck.
Luminarch Aspirant? Anyone?
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just take my free +1/+1 counter. I mean,
Yeah,
this
every
kind
turn.
of has that, but it takes a turn, you know? Like,
Yeah.
and it doesn't put a counter on itself.
Yeah, I don't know. We could concoct scenarios and decks in which this would be good, but those decks do not currently exist. All right. Let's look at this next lesson we have here. Environmental Sciences. 2-mana sorcery lesson, colorless. Search a library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. You gain 2 life. That's definitely a playable-ish card that I might sometimes want to pull out of my sideboard, for sure.
Hit your land drop, gain a little life, maybe fix your colors if you're a 3-color deck and maybe you don't have your red mana for your Winota or something yet. You know, yeah, this card is fine. Definitely one of the wishboard options in best of 1. Will it make the cut in best of 3?
Yeah,
maybe
it would have to be a very specific deck, I suppose.
It is cheap, cheaper than the other lessons.
This card has a fair amount of Thraben Inspector to it.
Yes.
There were a lot of times when Thraben Inspector helped you to hit that 3rd land drop. And granted, I haven't seen any 1-cost learn cards, but this could easily be something like that.
If there is a 1-cost learn card, this card is like a significant amount better because this doesn't look nearly as compelling on turn 3, for sure. But
totally agree.
I'm with you.
Yeah, compelling card. Okay. That looks like the end of the standard playable spoilers that we have for you today.
What do you think?
So, I think I'm with you, CGB. It's a little bit troubling that the card I'm most interested in that I've seen so far, apart from the dual-colored lands, of course, which will be interesting, is an uncommon 2/1 for 2.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of text that didn't amount to much. I think Liliana is the other card that I don't think it creates any new decks or anything, but its raw power level might fit into some decks that are looking to tap out on turn 6 and slam a planeswalker for some card advantage. I don't know how much of that magic gets played. The rant I have in me really quick, like, this set really needs to hit, and it's for this reason. None of these color combinations that are featured in these I don't want to say houses and I don't want to say guilds. Colleges.
Yes.
The color combinations featured in these colleges don't have like an amazing deck in standard right now. Simic,
very true.
Boros, Orzhov, Izzet, and Golgari. Like, none of those are like color plus deck actively in standard. Now, when a set is focused specifically on a combination of colors like this, like, remember when Guilds of Ravnica hit standard? It hit it on the back of like Ixalan block, which was pretty weak. And every deck pretty much had to play like Ravnica guilds because that's where the shocklands were. And that's where the powerful cards were printed. The problem is that most of these cards will not work in existing decks because they're printed in specific color combinations that aren't working in existing decks right now. There are heavy incentives to be monocolored if you're aggro. You get Faceless Haven. Card's nuts. You also get other snow cards that may or may not be great. There are heavy incentives to be 3-color. We have Triomes, right? There are heavy incentives to play adventure cards. there need to be some pretty powerful cards to get people to play these colors. And I don't see it yet, so I'm scared. I am a little scared that Strixhaven, lacking like that kind of oomph in these colleges, could be a complete bust.
Yeah, I mean, based on what I've seen so far, I'm definitely with you.
For standard, to be really clear, because of just the way the format is lined up right now. There are so many incentives to not play these colors that nobody's playing them, these color combinations. So we need good incentives, and it's not here yet. And last time, yes, with the last set, they absolutely slow rolled it. The first week was a bunch of eye rolls, and then the second week was bangers. And going into week 2, Arjuna, I need the bangers. I need to see the bangers.
Well, they gave us a cheap card.
They did. That happened.
Spoiler alert, the next segment that we're going to talk about is basically an exercise in why cheap cards are good.
True.
Yeah, but that was kind of one of the complaints that you, me, Crokies, and anyone else paying attention to was, complaining about the Kaldheim spoilers, was that we were just looking for the good cheap cards. And so that's one thing that we're missing. I feel like if we just took every card in this set and shaved like 1 to 2 mana off of it, I'd kind of be excited to take a fresh look at it.
Yeah. I think anyway. I feel like we got the Commander previews in week 1.
Indeed.